53. That's where we are. Good evening, everyone. It's almost fall-ish weather. And just so those who have inquired as to the accuracy of the numbers on the board, they are correct. The offering this morning was $14,178. So that was just cool. I'm all about that. That's a great building fund offering. It's over twice what last year's Thanksgiving offering was. So that's just great. The Lord is good, and He blesses us. Hymn 653. Let's sing the first and last verses. Whiter than snow. Let's stand as we sing. Thank you. You may be seated. I'm glad you came back. It's kind of dreary out there and a little bit on the raw side, but it's nice in here, and we're glad that you're back. We had good services this morning, a good Thanksgiving worship, and with good attendance. And I'm glad that you're back tonight. We got a hassle of young people over there getting ready for their Christmas stuff, and otherwise meandering all around, but they're meandering around back there with youth leaders, so I don't guess I can complain because I see adults. So anyhow, if you did not get your poinsettia order in, that needs to find my hand tonight. The orders will be sent in tomorrow morning. We have to place our order, and so Donna Shaw is on pins and needles getting me the orders. I got to call her first thing in the morning, and I'm not going to wait. I'm going to call her tonight with the numbers so that she can place the order tomorrow morning. So if you don't have your money, I'm not concerned about that. Let's get the order. We need to make sure we know how many poinsettias we need for next Sunday. And remember the activities of the week. It's a regular week almost. We're going to move Wednesday to Tuesday and have our Wednesday night stuff on Tuesday. Sounds of Praise will rehearse tomorrow night. Our Wednesday night supper is going to be on Tuesday night with Team 5 serving. And then at 7, it's going to be a family Thanksgiving devotional time here in the sanctuary. There won't be any youth meetings. They're going to join us here. Not going to be any play rehearsals or anything. We're going to sit back, kick back, and spend a little bit of quality fellowship time together and be thankful for all that God has done for us. So that's Tuesday night at 7 with no services here Wednesday night, and happy Thanksgiving for Thursday. And then next Sunday, the Hanging of the Greens, a lot going on. Please keep your bulletin, and because of all of those upcoming things that are just there to be reminded, for you to be reminded of that are upcoming, and keep a check on our webpage. We will be updating that probably next weekend with all of the December dates, times, and events. So that's a good place to see what is going on. Other than that, those are the announcements. And so as a time of prayer tonight, I want to mention again the offering. I think we should. That's just a tremendous praise item. That's a great offering. One of our larger building fund offerings, and so we're grateful for that. And the offering tonight will be added to that. Um, but that's a praise item, and enjoy that. And got another praise item. This is cool. This morning, right after Phil got through singing the hymn, you heard this little voice in the background. Y'all hear it say, "Yay!" They were just thrilled that, and they were like, "Who was that? Who was that?" And Karen's looking and says, "Who was that?" I said, "That's Berkeley." She says, "What's a Berkeley?" And I'm like, "You said no?" She said, "Who's a Berkeley?" Well, when they left church, well, the Williams family has been visiting with us, but Karen's worked the last couple of Sundays and she hadn't seen them, and so she was like, "Who's Berkeley?" And so it's like, okay, miss one Sunday, and somebody's going to walk out the door that you don't know, and that's a good thing. That's cool. So Karen had to introduce herself to Timmy and Tristan, and Miss Berkeley, who were in worship today. So that part that's cool, and that's the good side and the high side of that, and so we're thankful for that. Now, other prayer request. I'm going to say this now because she is not here, and there have been a number of requests for this, and so we're going to put it out. The board approved this morning, but since she is not here, we're going to say it, and I'll do a phone tree in a few days, and we'll punch her out. But on Sunday, December the 6th, that is 2 weeks from today, we are going to receive a love offering for Phil and Annette Holiday, with all that they have had, his upcoming surgery and everything else. We've had a number of people expressing concern about that, and we are going to do that. But when I send out the phone tree, it will not have, I'm good. We can punch them right out and they don't get to hear the message. But we are going to do that 2 weeks from today. There will be a love offering for anyone who would like to be supportive of all that they've got going on. So his surgery will be on the 16th. Miss Septum over there with her new nose will be on the 15th. And so, and both of them are going to be in Raleigh, so at least I don't have to travel. I just go there one time and I just, stay there for both surgeries. But those are both coming up in December. So praise items for the blessings, the visitors, the blessings, the offering this morning, just all of the things that were so great. And then the items of concern for the names that are on our prayer list and their needs. Are there any other prayer requests tonight or any updates that anyone wants to? Well, good. And y'all need to say goodbye to Billy Gherkin tonight. It's the last time you're going to see him because he sent me a picture from Pennsylvania of some French toast they were eating. And I'm going to kill him and tell God he died because he didn't bring me anything back. So he just sends you these pictures on Facebook. Don't this look good? And I'm like, right, fine. That's all right, Billy. I didn't even get an invitation to go. I wasn't even invited to go, It would have been a wonderful time for me to get out of the house for about 3 days. No. I had to stay home and haul boxes in and out. It's okay. It's all right. That's our big praise item. We sat around a table in our home and ate lunch today. So, other prayer requests. That's the praise item, the fever coming down. Any others? Right. And so and Curtis and Carrie and all of them have the bug. I think it started with Olivia, went through Heidi, and then to the rest of them. So that's where they have been. Right. Okay, so now we're the rows of crudettes. That's what we got. I guess everybody's getting the crud. 'Tis the season. So, and we had a number of you that traveled this past week. I hope you enjoyed your little Lancaster trip in Pennsylvania. Fine. Glad you got back safely. Sort of. That's okay. Any other prayer requests? Father in heaven, for this day we're thankful. For the many ways that you've blessed us and showed us that this season is so important. Help it to always be important to us. That we always recognize your goodness to us, the bounty of your blessings to us. Help us to grow and mature in our Christian walk so that we have a better understanding between want and need, and service as opposed to being served. Help us to understand that we can never outgive you, and that the greatest sense of satisfaction a Christian can have is to know that they've lifted the heart and the burden of someone else. Well, the prayer needs, the prayer requests, the praise items, we give them to you with thankful hearts, with concerned hearts, for those that have needs, for those that remain on our prayer list, for all of the circumstances that surround each name and each home. Now, visit us with your presence tonight as we continue to explore your word. Keep us safe and guide us during this special week with all of the activities, for the times with families and friends and the travel. Keep us safe. Make this a joyous time and a joyous week of Thanksgiving. In Christ we pray. Amen. Keith, if you would, and Paul would serve as ushers. Paul, would you ask God's blessings on the offering?
Heavenly Father, as
Amen. This is probably one of the more personal or personalized commandments, and probably is one that has touched a number of families, even churches. So I just titled this tonight A Matter of the Heart, because that's what it is. The fifth commandment is simple in verse 14 of Exodus 20. But I'm going to read the story from Matthew 5, where Jesus referred to this commandment in his Sermon on the Mount. I'm going to read beginning with verse 27 down through verse 32 to give you the New Testament context behind this Old Testament commandment. The commandment from Exodus 20 verse 14 is simple: thou shalt not commit adultery. Jesus said, beginning with verse 27, as he stood there among multitudes that day, you have heard the commandment that says you must not commit adultery. But I say anyone who even looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if your eye, even your good eye, causes you to lust, gouge it out and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your hand, even your stronger hand, causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. You have heard the law that says a man can divorce his wife by merely giving her a written notice of divorce. But I say that a man who divorces his wife, unless she has been unfaithful, causes her to commit adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman also commits adultery. Now, that's the New Testament version of 21 centuries ago. I'm going to start with a story. And so this becomes difficult for me, or not difficult, it's not difficult for me, but there were people in my life that made it difficult because they took some of this stuff quite literally and tried to refuse me the opportunity to keep my credentials when my wife walked out on me 29 years ago. So there's a varied opinion as to what these verses mean and how they should be lived or enforced. Story goes like this. A pastor asked one of his wayward members if he knew anything about the Ten Commandments. He replied by declaring that he had intended to learn them, but he heard they were going to be repealed, so he didn't bother. Sometimes I think that the seventh commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery, that has happened in our society today. They think it's been repealed. You would think, in looking at some aspects of every civilized society, many people today are thumbing their noses at the commandment that simply says don't commit adultery. I want to look at three things. I want to look at this. I thought about four, but we're going to start with three. I want to look at the cause. And with every cause, there's always a consequence. And then I want to try to talk about how we conquer it. So those are your three C words to take home with you. Okay? They were E words this morning with thankfulness, but they'll be C words tonight. Okay? What are the causes of adultery? What are the reasons why men and women commit adultery? As one guy said, the reasons are legion. There are hundreds of them. But I think we can group them into three categories as to why or what it is that causes adultery. Physical, spiritual, and psychological. Start with the physical. God made people with physical bodies, and he made people with a built-in sexual drive. That is just plain, common, biological sense. He did that. With some of us, he did a wonderful job. With others, not so good. No, I'm kidding. But he created that. This was and it is a beautiful thing. It's a meaningful part of humanity, and it is not sinful. It isn't. But we men and women, being who we are, found some way to pervert this natural drive and turn it into almost animalistic impulses with no thought of the heart at all. Some people will say when they get into counseling, I couldn't restrain myself. Would you like what they really meant? What they were really saying was, I didn't want to restrain myself or deny my desire. I just want, but that's what the real truth is. In other instances, adultery gets unplanned. People don't walk away from tempting situations when they could and when they have opportunity. Sometimes, no, let me say that. Frequently, alcohol is a factor. People lose a lot of inhibitions when alcohol becomes dominant. Saying I was drunk, that may explain the adultery, but it doesn't excuse it, nor does it exempt it from the consequences. So there are a lot of physical causes. They are. And I've told you the story before, right after Karen and I got married. And we moved to Cove City 3 weeks after we got married. And then we went to New Bern one night, or one afternoon late, and we were going to walk around and learn the city and all. And here was Twin Rivers Mall. I'd never been to Twin Rivers Mall, It was fascinating to me. We go walking down the mall. And it's summer. We went there in May, or in June, first week of June. And we were walking down the mall, 3 weeks newlyweds, hand in hand. Of course, we still walk down the mall holding hands. Our boys are embarrassed by that. Caleb goes, Mother, would you please? And I'm like, I had to hold her hand to get her. I'm got to hold her hand to keep her. That's the way I look at it. Anyhow. And we're walking. And these couple of girls went walking by there, in their tank tops and their Daisy Dukes. It's the middle of June. And my head just kind of went like that. And then I got whiplash real quick. She yanked on me. And I said, honey, it's biblical. And she's like, what are you talking about? I said, the word says, behold what the Lord hath made. And she says, just don't you beholding what the Lord has made. So we got that right out of the way real early in the relationship. mean, God done some beautiful things. I never, Frank Ray Harrison tickled the tar out of me my first year at Mount Olive. He said, let me tell you fellas something. One of the things I'm most grateful for is eyesight because God did some beautiful work. Do you hear me? And he said, he did. He said, some people he stuck behind the door too long or he left them in there too long or whatever, but he did some beautiful work. And the first boy to float in the class raised his hand and said, you weren't one of them, were you? And Frank, he takes kind of that stuff kind of personal. That kid didn't last too long. Well, there's a lot of physical causes. Then there's spiritual causes. Biblically speaking, God intended a sexual relationship to be a very meaningful, intimate, and beautiful thing. There's nothing dirty or shameful about it. It was intended to be a loving experience between a man and a woman who are married. It was not some kind of a toy to be used for amusement. And according to the Bible, as I have tried to read it, there seems to be three basic reasons God gave us the sexual experience. To attract the opposite sex in order to find your mate. God intended that man and woman would not stay with their parents, but they would find each other, and the two would become one flesh. That's a drive that brings two people together. It's also a very personal and intimate way for you to express your love between your mate, between the husband and the wife. And then, of course, it's the way God gave us to sustain life by bringing new life. But we became sinners. And as we did with every single facet in life, we found a way to pervert something that was good and meaningful in the eyes of God. We didn't just do it with sexual relationships. We did it in every arena that we could possibly be a part of, because that's what sinful human beings do. So today we have to say we're sinful people. We are. And so there's this battle between our spiritual self, our physical self, over how we're supposed to conduct ourselves. And this affects Christians, to me, more than non-Christians, because non-Christians don't care. They don't see it as wrong. They're self-satisfying. They could care less what you think. They're going to do what they want to do. So the impetus here and the struggle is for the Christian, because we know better. We know God's intent. We know God's purpose for us as husband and wife and male and female. So our problem is we become careless. And we get trapped. When you get careless, Satan steps in. He's quick. He's good. I was watching basketball some this afternoon, and I was just trying to point out to Karen how good this Grayson kid is for Duke. He's really good. And the moment I said that, the dude on Georgetown head faked him, backdoored him, and he just scored it because Grayson said, oops, and he was gone. And I said, just that quick, Satan can get in there. Just as quick as if you're watching the wrong ball and not your own movements. Satan can creep in before you know it. He's good. But we'll say, no, I'd never do that. I'd never do that. I may do a lot of things, but I'd never do that. I've heard that more than once in my career. And so, consequently, they don't ever see a need to make this a matter of prayer. We have our pride, but we say that in pride, we fail to be watchful. And we ought to be. Paul gave a warning in 1 Corinthians 10:12. He said, remember, let him who thinks he standeth, what? Take heed, lest he fall. Just when you think you got it under control, God can remind you, and Satan can sure exploit you. Be careful. And if you don't think it won't come back, and this thing about I would never do this, this is a true story about a former original Free Will Baptist minister who will remain nameless, but the story is true. As some of you Trojans of our faith know, we have a very conservative side of our ministry. And they're super conservative. They're anti the college. They believe it ought to be a Bible college. They were anti-liberal arts school. They're very, very conservative. And a few years ago, they had a kingpin of who their spokesman was. Well, he was always the outspoken one on the convention floor. He was always he was the mouthpiece for the movement about how horrible our college was, and about how everybody's going to hell in a handbasket and all this kind of stuff, and how immoral this was and that was, and how the shorts were too short. Now, they just found every conceivable way they could speak negative about our college or anybody that worked for it. To make a long story short, the mouthpiece for this movement is no longer an original Free Baptist minister. He no longer even resides in the state of North Carolina. As the story goes, he developed torn rotator cuffs in both shoulders and had both shoulders operated on at the same time. And we saw him at one conference like this because it was all right after his surgery, barely moving. And he was having a horrifically tough time with his physical therapy. But his physical therapist went above and beyond. No offense, Lisa. Follow me. At any rate, his wife went out the window and he and the physical therapist lived in Virginia. Mr. High Moral, Mr. Shoot My Mouth Off about what kind of life you ought to be living, gave in to the temptation, and the very things that he stood for 25 years have now made him a person who can't show his face in this state. He had to turn in his credentials. He had to resign his church. He had to leave this denomination. He had to leave the state. That's how embarrassed he was, because he knew how big his mouth had been about judging us, me and you and anybody else who would care to listen to him. Be careful in your own pride and in your own self-sufficiency. It will come back to haunt you. So there are spiritual things. The third one is the psychological causes, and I don't know a lot about this. The causes are varied. I wrote a few things down. The people that know about these things, they tell us that many people engage in adultery because of an egocentric personality. That kind of person says, I have a right to be happy. I have a right to please myself. I've worked hard. I've educated. I've got a right to do this. It doesn't matter if anybody gets hurt. All that matters is if I get pleased, if I get satisfied, if I feel good about myself. And they'll use gratification as an end unto itself. Some people will say, I love you, just as a justification. What they're really saying is, I love me, and I want you to gratify me. Adultery is often committed by people who don't think very much of themselves and feel a sense of inadequacy. A lot of psychological things. Immature personalities. So there are a lot of causes. Causes create consequences when we give in to the things. So the consequence, whatever the cause of adultery may be, there are always consequences that follow. Just as certain as day is going to follow this dark night, there are consequences. God has warned us. Society has warned us. The Bible has warned us. You read the Bible stories. David discovered this after his sin with Bathsheba. He confessed and he received forgiveness. But Nathan said, 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 13 and 14. I love it. The Lord has put away your sin. Howbeit is in the King James. I love that word. Howbeit, translated into 21st century, it means but. You have been forgiven, but doesn't take away the consequences of what you did. Sin always has a howbeit, whether it's adultery or any other sin. There's always going to be a consequence. For every kick, as one football player said, for every kick there's a kick back. It's going to happen. Everything has its price tag. And sexual immorality is no different from the rest of it. So what happens? What are these consequences? Something happens to the individuals that are involved with this. There's always the risk of a woman getting pregnant. There's always the risk of both the man and the woman getting sexually transmitted diseases. There's still the threat of AIDS. But the emotional consequences can be devastating too. There are physical as well as emotional consequences. Have you read Nathaniel Hawthorne's book, The Scarlet Letter? The story about Hester Payne she's required to wear a scarlet A on her dress as a badge of shame. But for the, quote, ladies of her society and community, they felt that punishment was too light. And they wanted her to be branded on her forehead with the letter A to stand for adulteress. But a kindly woman speaks up in the book and says, let her cover the mark as she will. The pains of it will always be in her heart. And biblically speaking, contempt for the other person is a usual outcome of adultery. That's in the Bible. In 2 Samuel 13:15, after Amnon raped Tamar, the Word of God says that he hated her with very great hatred. After the fact. So something happens to us. Something happens to our psyche. The home, the marriage relationship, they're all threatened. Premarital sex, contrary to popular belief, does not prepare a person for marriage. The most inconsequential, and all of us know this, I hope, the most inconsequential thing of a marriage relationship is the sexual part of it. You know? But yet today, and I've had more than one of these in my 37 years. People want to, quote, live together a while to make sure we'll be okay married. Now, I look at marriage as a great adventure. That's what we renamed it when we realized we just might have made a huge mistake. No, I'm kidding. But the marriage is supposed to be the great adventure in life. You know, if you take your life seriously, then your attitude is that, okay, here I am with who God wants me to be with for the rest of my life. Now, I can't predict what the rest of my life is going to be like. So I'm just going to look forward to the ride and the journey and hold on. To me, that should be the Christian attitude about marriage. I can't predict what it's going to be like. I'm sure if you would ask my wife, she would say, I had no idea that the last 27 years were going to be with her. She probably don't, you know. I don't think she's been too upset with the journey. I don't know. She's still around. Of course, now she's got her mother here. They're going to gang up on me, so I may need somewhere to stay. We'll see. And the thing about it is the comparisons are so unfair. The man running out on his wife, he only sees that one side of that woman. He sees her dressed up and pretty and hiding from her husband. He don't see her cold cream face at night and the curls in her hair and her dirty makeup and all this kind of stuff that goes along with the marriage fun of the journey kind of thing that we're all familiar with. He only sees that exciting, made up, you know, and the same for the woman. Oh, she just sees Mr. John Q. I'm working out on the elliptical machine here, you know. Or the way it was for me. Showing my age again. My wife has lusted at more than one TV screen. Do you hear me? As have the rest of you who love the show Magnum P.I. Go ahead. That's right. Raise your hand and say, let God love you. Or for those of you that go back maybe even a little further than that, Luke on the Young and Restless. Yeah, right. I didn't watch it. My girlfriend's told me about it. But yes, Lord, that was before the time you could record something. So I just had to put up with Mr. Magnum P.I. You know. But he was fine, according to my wife. Well, if he's so fine, why don't you like Blue Bloods now? Because he's the police chief of that police force now that your son watches all the time. Like he don't have nothing else to do by being a policeman. He comes home and watches Blue Bloods all the time. Now. But it's an unfair comparison to compare the jock out there in the gym run. You know, he may be out there running off frustrations of a horrible business deal or a horrible home life or kids that are driving him crazy. And that might be the great facade that he's put up out there. You know? May not be all that it's cracked up to be. Or the finely dressed one that comes into the business who's the salesman or the rep or whatever. Oh, he looks good. And no telling what he's covering up with the clothes. It's not a fair comparison when you get into the adultery business. And then in the end, society is the one that pays the price. You know? Elton Trueblood wrote these words. He said, if our civilization ever loses respect for marital fidelity, giving itself up to any orgy of indulgence, our society will fall with a terrible crash. No matter how externally powerful and rich we may be, there are many evidences that we are going in that direction. And unless we can change our course, nothing will save us. And you know what? He's dead on. He's nailed it. He's got it right. I mentioned some of this in a previous message. But the report came that the single most important factor, the single most overriding factor as to why we have high rates of teenage crime, high rates of youth unemployment, so is the lack of the father in the home, the lack of the family unit. Now, I'm not saying that to pick on the men, but it is more dominantly men because the women usually have the children. Here and there is the man, you know, that got left with the children when the woman walked out wanting her kind of a fantasy world. But that's the big issue. It comes back to those two H words, the home and the heart. And that's where they are. And until we can rediscover that, we will never do this last thing, and that is to conquer adultery. How do we counteract a force that is so powerful? How do we counteract a force that can be made to look so pleasing, so easy, so just absolutely pleasurable? How do you counteract something like this that is such a sin? Well, start like everyone else does. Realize the source. Start with the source of the problem. Jesus said in verse 28, chapter 5, whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery already. Has committed adultery already in his heart. You see, a long time before the schools of psychology, Jesus knew that it was possible to fix the human imagination on a person to the point to where to indulge in a relationship purely vicariously. In other words, just deep within your mind, you could just sit there and say, you could just imagine the whole experience. That is so dangerous. And the scriptures teach us to cast it down or take it captive when it comes to our improper thoughts. Because you got to learn the source, you got to reach it at the source, and realize that there's a price to pay of conquest. Now, in this story here on the Sermon on the Mount, I hesitate a little bit because of how graphic it sounds. Jesus speaks plucking out an eye, cutting off a hand. He's not suggesting that we mutilate our bodies. Okay? These are not words that people there in his day were taking literally. Such a procedure would be two things. It would be inadequate and it would be ineffective. Okay? It wouldn't work. Because you see, the problem is not physical, the problem is spiritual. The problem is spiritual. He's saying, though, that anything that leads to temptation or exposes to danger needs to be rejected. That's what he's talking about. Get rid of it, regardless of how important you think it is, regardless of the desirability or its cost. Carrie can tell you that I'm very scary about counseling situations. 9 times out of 10, they either come to the house when my wife is home, or if it's a young person, mama or daddy, or both are going to be in the office too. It's just, people will take something and twist it any way under the sun, so the best thing I can do is just try not to give them a platform to twist something. I may not get it right all the time, but just where we are today. So how do we conquer this? Let's be Peter Pan. I know that sounds silly, but I think it's right. William Barclay reminds us of the famous scene in the story of Peter Pan. When Peter Pan is down here out of Never Never Land, and he's in the children's bedroom. They've seen him fly, and now they're trying to fly. They can't get off the floor. They try to jump off the floor. You see it. They get on the bed. They try to jump off the bed, and they look at Peter and say, Peter, we can't do it. What do we do? And what did he say? Simple. Don't you remember? Haven't you seen Peter Pan? He said, think happy. Think happy thoughts. Get the negative out, get the bad out, get the dangerous things out. Think the good, the wonderful, the meaningful, and they will lift you up. They will lift you in the air. So what does that mean for us? How do we overcome the dangers of this? How do we help people that we see it happening to overcome and move through the dangers of this? Do the better things of life with your mind. Fill your mind with the better things of life. The final verse is Paul's in Philippians 4:8. He said it this way from the RSV. Finally, brethren, and you know this, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, it comes from thinking on these things. There may be a lot of things out there, but we mold our world. We mold it. I'm not so certain that we're winning when it comes to morals and ethics in our world, because they've just become so unimportant. It's just like it's something that you do, but it's not something that you do. It's something that destroys marriages. It's something that destroys homes. It's something that destroys relationships. It's a form of disobedience that is a sin that is very, very personal and very individual, but yet at the same time it impacts the entire family. I'll never forget the day that my wife looked at me and said, you got to go because I don't love you. And I walked out and went to my parents' house and said, I need somewhere to stay because she has asked me to leave. It was 4 hours later that we called the rescue squad to get Daddy to the hospital because he had had a heart attack. Don't ask me how I felt about that time in my life. It doesn't just affect you. It affects all around us. So we've got to be happy with our happy thoughts. The good things, the meaningful things, have got to overcome and override that which isn't. That's a task. But it begins, first of all, by individual example. With ourselves as Christians, our families, our homes, and our church. May God bless us with the strength we need to live so that people see the difference. Thank you for coming. Let's stand and be dismissed. Albert, would you dismiss us, please?